Hello, welcome to this video. I just quickly wanted to walk you guys through how to do this brim method of adding a brim to a beanie or hat or anything that you've worked top down, increased your way up, and now we want to add a brim to it. Because typically you would make your brim and then make the stitches on top and kind of go out from there. But this is an alternate method, and it's one that is featured in my Snuggly Skull Cap pattern, and it's kind of hard to just show you guys in pictures. So I've already been working my brim on this one, but let's imagine that we didn't have our brim and we're done building our hat outward, and we would start with just a chain out of how long you want your brim to be. And in this pattern it calls for 13 chains, and then we go into the second chain from the hook. So that's what you would do here, but I'm just going to keep going and show you guys this method from here. So let's imagine that this is my chain out row, and then you are just going to essentially work your way out and then back to the hat, and those are going to be the rows that we are working in this pattern. And this is just a single crochet stitch, and we are just working in the back loops only to give us that beautiful ribbing. Okay. So you've completed your chain stitch. Now what? It is time to work back towards the base of this beanie. And so you're just going to chain one, as you usually would, and you're going to work your way back across in that back loop half double crochet stitch. And if you were starting with your first chain, this is where we would work into the second loop from the chain, and this would be technically our first row. We're just going to work back down. It's not easy to crochet and be in a camera. This was my first time doing anything like this, but I think this will give us a better visual of what's actually going on. So if you've never done this method before, it's quite hard to read it off of a pattern and know what you're doing there. Okay, got my stitches. So now comes the difficult part. So we just created an extra row and we chained up. So now what we need to do with this hat to make sure that we're not adding crazy amounts of rows, because essentially we want one row for every stitch that's along the base of this hat. That's our goal. So here you can see I've already slip stitched in from my previous row. So we're gonna go up, and you can kind of just see where it would naturally want to connect in to that hat, right? So this is going to count essentially as our chain for this row, and we're just going to slip stitch into our beanie. And so this is essentially just going to keep us flush and on track with how many stitches this way we have going. But we're going to be working back another row, so that needs an extra stitch in here. So we will end up slip stitching 2 stitches every time we make it back to our beanie. And that's because we went out and came back, so we've essentially added 2 rows. So we need to account for 1 row and then our another row up above it. And then we will actually turn our work around and then work backwards across this way. And this will be kind of the same direction out that you work your chain. And so what you'll see here is you see 1, 2 slip stitches. So I'm actually going to work into this stitch right here. This is the first stitch of this row. And one hack, you can always kind of come to the end of your row and count in. If you're ever unsure, count in how many stitches you would need. And then that will let you know if you're on the right track or not. Essentially, you will just work backwards, back down the row, and then keep going from there. So you'll keep going, back loop single crochets. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. And then you will stitch around your whole beanie, and then when you end up back here, you will just crochet your way down, and then what we'll do is we'll end up flipping it right sides in and then seaming it up that way. Okay, so I have just finished the last row of my brim of this hat. And I know it's my last row because I slipped into those very last 2 stitches and everything lines up nicely. Now you have a couple options for the seam. That's the next part that we're going to walk through. You can just flip it right sides in and start seaming right now. One thing that I do kind of like to do when I'm doing this method, and specifically on this one because it is a skull cap, so it's meant to be really tight, is this seam is actually going to take up just the slightest bit of length of your brim. So if you like, you could stitch an extra row along here, and then you can just slip in to this little slip knot here that was created by the join of the rounds, and that will give you just a little bit of seam allowance. I am not going to be doing that just because I'm almost out of yarn for this project. I'm just going to jump right into seaming, but that is something that I would usually do in any sort of form-fitting, very snug pattern, is I would just give myself that extra row. But like I said, cutting it close on the yarn front. So I'll show you how this is going to work. So you have your stitches. These ones are going to be very clear. These ones are not going to be so clear, but that's okay, because all I am going to do is take my yarn, take my hook. I'm going to work through the first stitch of this row and the first stitch of that row. Make sure you're not grabbing that chain or anything. And then you're just going to seam them together. I know some people like to use slip stitches. I've always preferred to work with single crochets. I don't really know why. We're on stitch number 2 though, so I grabbed stitch 2 over here. I'm going to grab stitch number 2 over there. If you are a tight chainer like me, some of these chain stitches might be a little tough to get into, but just make sure you're staying the first stitches together, the second stitches, and that's okay. The work will definitely stretch out a little bit if you chained on the tighter side. Yep, we are just going to keep on going. And then almost done here. Just grabbing these last 3 stitches, it looks like. Okay, 1 more stitch to go. Excuse me. Okay, so now you've done your seam. I like to go through, just take a look at it, make sure I didn't have any gaps or holes. I might add 1 more stitch right in there. Just make sure everything looks nice. And this can happen sometimes if you go through like not all the stitches, or if you grab kind of lower down in the fabric and pull it down really tight, it can make a gap. Yeah, that looks much better to me. And now all you do is just pull through that guy. Have a knot at the end of my wool so it doesn't unravel. So you'll just pull that guy down nice and tight, weave in your loose end with a tapestry needle, and there you have it, the snuggly skull cap. If you're interested in making one of your own, this is the smallest size. There's 2 more larger sizes, a medium and a large, and you can purchase this pattern on my Etsy shop, which is PurplePoppyFiberArts. Thanks for watching.